When they pulled the canvas sack off the shackled mafioso's head, he squinted, expecting blinding light. But the warehouse where his captors had taken him was dim and cool. The only light source was a few columns of dusty sun from high, open windows. He sniffed. The place smelled like fish and something worse. From outside, he could hear seagulls, ship horns, and dock workers on the job. A bit of sea breeze off the bay shook the dirty plastic curtain that hung across the far wall. The mafioso cleared his throat and looked up at the dozens of men gathered around him, their faces in shadow, their arms crossed. They were dressed in denim and flannel and old work boots, and many had beards or unkempt, shoulder-length hair. What a joke. This new brand of so-called gangster had no style at all. When he was coming up, in the 60s and 70s, the criminal underworld in the city of Grim Bay had class. They had gravitas. But it was 1986 now, and all that was gone. Just like his cousins and friends and compatriots, all were dead or locked up. A door squeaked open, and the crowd of gangsters parted to make way for the newcomers. He wondered if it would be her, the matriarch of this crew. But the two individuals now approaching his chair were male. At first, he thought it was one man and one boy, but no, they were both children. He had heard rumors about these two, the bastard sons of the new Queen Pin, but to see them in the flesh was something else entirely. The boy in front was about 13. He looked tough and stoic, dressed in a dark denim jacket and pants, and wearing a gold chain necklace and a diamond stud earring in his left ear. His coily black hair was cut short, and his skin, well, his skin was different. Asymmetrical patches of light and dark covered his face and hands, like dark brown clouds in a chalk-white sky. The mafioso let out a low whistle, then looked up over the first boy to the second, who stood with his shoulders slumped and his head bowed. This kid was technically the younger of the two, but thinking of him as a little brother, as a little anything, was absurd. Although only 10 years old, the kid was already over 6 feet tall, with a large head, broad shoulders, and the biggest freaking hands the mafioso had ever seen. His hair was bright orange, with a cowlick, and his downturned face was pale and wide, with exaggerated features, jutting forehead, flat nose, big ears. The only thing about these two that marked them as brothers were their eyes. They both had small, light blue eyes.
"Jesus, Mary and Joseph," said the mafioso, shaking his head. "Yous two really are a freak show. Let me guess."
He smirked at the shorter of the brothers, with the patches of light and dark color in his skin.
"Your daddy must have been a cow."
He looked up and let out a low whistle.
"And yours must have been a goddamn ogre. My, oh my. That goomah mother of yours really wasn't selective in what she screwed, now was she?"
This little outburst elicited a good deal of grumbling from the men in the warehouse, but the two boys, they didn't flinch.
"I have vitiligo, dumbass," said the boy in front. "And my brother has pituitary gigantism."
"Giantism, eh? Then it's like I said, eh, big boy?"
The oversized child said nothing.
"What's the matter with him? Don't he talk? What is he, slow?"
"No,"
said the brother in front.
"He's just quiet. It's called selective mutism. You know, you really should read a book sometime."
Ha ha!
He shifted on the seat and winced.
"Hey kids, think yous could loosen these goddamn shackles? They're rubbing my wrists and ankles raw."
Before the boys could answer, the door squeaked open a second time, and the distinct sound of high heels clicking on the concrete echoed around the warehouse. The gangster parted, nodding in respect, and the boys both moved aside. And there she was, in a power suit with shoulder pads, her red hair in a high perm, sucking on a large cigar as she approached. The mafioso grinned.
Well, well, my raid, McMurra. The whore who stole a criminal empire."
Coming to a stop, She blew a cloud of pale blue smoke from the side of her mouth and said,
If you look at history, Mr. Scarpinato, you'll find that every empire was built on theft and destruction. You should read a book sometime.
I was just telling him that, Ma,
said her eldest son. Mairead smiled.
Have you met my sons then? This here is Cormac,
reaching out with her free hand. Mairead laid it on the shoulder of the boy with vitiligo.
He's a hell of a businessman already, aren't you? And here,
she turned her eyes to the giant Ginger, who continued to stare at his feet,
is Dermit. Dermit will be a mighty fighter when he finally learns to come out of his shell, won't you?
Dermit did not respond. Turning back to her captive, Mairead took another draw on her cigar.
Boys, this greasy son of a bitch is Mikey Scarpinato, one of Romulus's many, many nephews.
Pleasure,
said the mafioso, rolling his eyes.
So can we move on from all these theatrics now? All this hoopla with the chains and the creepy warehouse and blah blah blah. It's rather silly, even for yous, Ma.
As soon as this word left his mouth, the crowd of gangsters behind her flinched, and one grizzled fellow with glasses, mutton chop sideburns, and a ponytail marched forward.
Oi,
the man snapped.
You don't be calling her that now. Why not? I thought everybody calls her Ma.
The Irishman glared behind his glasses.
We do. You call her Madam McMurra. My mistake.
He cleared his throat.
All right then, Madam McMurra. Yous want to intimidate me, right? Well, guess what? I'm intimidated. There. What else? Yous want me to kiss your fucking ring? Fine. The Celtic cartel is won. You own the streets. Happy now?
He leaned forward in the chair, chains jingling, and smirked.
But yous and I both know. You need me and my guys to handle the docks. Without us, you don't have the numbers to move your products or handle the authorities when they come sniffing around. I'm a vital part of your operation. Is that so?
Said Mairead, a twinkle in her blue eyes. She looked over at the man with the mutton chops.
Fitz, why don't you show our guest here the catch of the day? Right you are, Ma,
said Fritz, and walking to the wall, he grabbed a dangling rope and tugged it. On the back wall of the warehouse, the plastic curtain was dragged sideways. From his chair, Mikey Scarpinato narrowed his eyes, trying to make sense of the shapes suspended from the shadowy ceiling there, hanging on meat hooks. As comprehension dawned on his face, his eyes bulged. They were bodies. 40 men, naked, their arms and legs removed, their heads lolled forward. The hooks had been stabbed into their backs and out their bellies.
Jesus fucking Christ!
He spasmed in his seat, rattling the shackles.
You fucking bitch! What the fuck is wrong with you? What have you done?
Coming closer, Mairead lowered herself to one knee before him and drew deeply on the cigar.
I won.
She blew smoke in his sweaty face.
That's the thing about us. Irish Catholics. And it's the same as you Italians. We all have a boatload of cousins. And my boatload is arriving in the harbor tonight from the old country. 50 strong lads eager for work and loyal.
Her blue eyes squinted in a victorious smile.
So no, Mikey, I do not need you and your guys anymore.
Rising, she turned her back on him.
Oh, fuck!
He hissed, teeth gritted.
Fuck!
Mairead cast a look around at her men, then turned instead to her two sons. Cormac straightened up, puffing up his chest, showing what a brave little man he was. Behind him, Dermit did not move. She walked to her youngest son and looked up into his downturned face.
Dermit,
she said softly,
remember what we talked about? Well, it's time.
10-year-old Dermit's face flinched, and swallowing, he gave his head a little shake. Mairead sighed irritably. Cormac cleared his throat.
Hey, Ma, if he's not, up for it right now, I'd be happy to... Shut up, Corm. Your brother has put this off for long enough.
Dermit closed his eyes. At the end of his long, stocky arms, his massive hands curled into fists, as if trying to hide the size of each massive finger. Then he made a little noise in his throat, like a whispered grunt, deep and pleading, and tilting his head a bit to the left, his lips twitched and his forehead wrinkled.
What's that, boy?
Snapped his mother.
He says he don't feel good, Ma. Your brother could use his bloody words,
she screamed. And when Cormac opened his mouth to speak again, she shot him a stern look, and he cowered, silent. Turning back to Dermit, she lowered her voice to a sinister whisper.
My darling boy, the Lord in his wisdom has gifted you with the might of a warrior. It is shameful to let that go to waste.
Again, he only flinched.
None of that face-twitching shite. You know I can't fucking understand it.
Ma,
Cormac said.
he ain't ready. Please, just let me knife the fucker.
Oh, Jesus!
Wailed Mikey Scarpinato from the chair. Glaring, Mairead grabbed Dermit by one giant arm and pulled him. He did not resist, and stumbled forward as she guided him to stand directly in front of the shackled mafioso.
Now then, hold out your hands,
she demanded of her son. Dermit did not open his eyes, but slowly, watched by all, he uncurled his fists, then lifted his arms up, letting his massive hands hover in the air, on either side of Mikey Scarpinato's head.
Oh man, what the fuck is this?
Whined the mafioso, now starting to shake so badly his teeth chattered audibly. Mairead moved around Dermit, rested a hand on his back and whispered,
Good. Now, go on. Clap for this piece of shite.
Dermit didn't move.
Do it.
A shudder went through the boy's body, and he let out a tiny grunt. At his back, his mother snarled and jabbed him in the back with her hand.
Now!
Dermit shook his head. Cormac averted his eyes but whispered,
Just do it, Derm. Get it over with. Do it!
Their mother screamed, jabbing him again.
Kill!
Dermot's mouth stretched suddenly open, and his eyes blazed with fear and fury. He screamed, a sound like a wounded beast. He whipped his arms wide, then brought them crashing together with a thunderous crunch. The crowd of watching men gasped. Cormac closed his eyes. Mairead McMurra smiled, and patting Dermit lightly on the back, she said,
There now. That wasn't so hard now, was it?
Young Dermit could not tear his gaze off the sight before him. His giant hands remained on either side of the man's head, dripping, shaking. Mikey Scarpinato's skull had been crushed inward, the bone fragments loose and jutting under his bruising skin. One eye had exploded into goop, and the other was bulged out, bloodshot and loose on its optic nerve. From the ruined mouth above his shattered jaw, there issued bubbles of slobbery blood and wet, agonal breaths. Coming suddenly to, Dermit gasped and pulled his hands away. The head flopped sideways, and the body went limp in the chair, dripping blood and urine on the concrete floor. Cormac sighed, slid his hands into his pockets, and turned to walk to the exit. Brushing by his brother, he whispered,
It gets easier.
Fitz and the other members of the Celtic cartel turned to follow the boy out, walking in silence. Mairead moved around to Dermot's front, careful not to get any spilled bodily fluids on her shoes. She beamed up at her son.
I'm so proud of you, she told him. My little smasher.
Then she, too, turned and walked away, and Dermit was left alone, staring at the blood on his hands. As the 1980s rolled into the 1990s, the industrial hellscape around the harbor of Grim Bay gradually changed. Under the leadership of McMurra and her Celtic cartel, the place was cleaned up and modernized. The surrounding borough, known affectionately as Little Dublin, changed too, from a rundown neighborhood of decrepit housing for the dockhands and their families into a thriving hub of activity 24/7. And while the city's elite might have preferred to stay in their penthouse apartments in the corporate downtown, their rebellious children all knew the truth. For a good time, you had to cross the Odin's Gate Bridge into Little Dublin and go for drinks at the Ballygub. Or for a great time, you had to visit the Lusty Shamrock. By March of 1998, that nightclub had a lot to offer. And not just exotic dancers, pool tables, an extensive cocktail menu, and the city's best DJ. For beyond the main floor of the club, there lay a maze of back rooms, where one could procure just about anything for the right price, from a kilo of Colombia's finest to private companionship of every sort, and even anti-aircraft artillery. Despite all these criminal offerings, many people would rank their favorite part about visiting the Lusty Shamrock to simply be getting to see the establishment's infamous bouncer in person. Standing at 8'6" and counting, the 21-year-old ginger giant, known as Smasher, had become something of a local celebrity. And though he rarely ever spoke to the patrons at the Lusty Shamrock, they always got a thrill out of having him check IDs and nod at them stoically inside, or else turn them away with a shake of the head that, while subtle, was never ignored. He kept his bright orange hair long and loose upon his hulking shoulders, and his wide jaw was traced in a chin-strap beard. He wore suspenders over a white collared shirt, jeans that barely fit over his muscular thighs, and the tailor-made boots, as no store-bought footwear would fit him. One evening, as a group of nervous young men reached the front of the line outside, the one in front raised his driver's license in a shaky hand. Dermit McMurra plucked it up in his 10-inch fingers and squinted down at the date of birth, one bristly eyebrow raised on his jutting forehead. The young man swallowed.
What? I'm 21, man!
Dermot's other eyebrow went up.
Fine. I turn 21 tomorrow. But it'll be midnight in like a few hours. Come on, Mr. Smasher, just let me in.
Dermit looked down, his blue eyes alight.
Please?
The young man added. Dermit cracked a smile, and handing the ID back, he turned and lifted the green velvet rope to let the group pass inside. Even as they disappeared down the dim hall, from which pumping music played, another young man jogged out, looking anxious.
Sup, Derm?
He said, a little breathless.
They need you inside.
The man, whom everyone called Young Fitz, to differentiate him from his father, moved to take Dermot's place by the door. Dermit turned and started to duck into the entryway when young Fitz added in a whisper,
It's Lotus.
At the mention of the name Lotus, Dermit moved suddenly faster, his hulking body rushing down the hall in almost perfect silence, so that as he came upon patrons, they were startled and jerked aside. Emerging into the wide-open main floor, with its strobing lights and thumping bass, he moved quickly through the tables and approached the stage, where spotlights shone on the stripper pole, though no dancers were on the stage. At the foot of the stage, a short man in a pinstripe suit was screaming in the faces of two of the club's dancers. One of the women, who had jet black hair held up with lotus flower clips, was bleeding from a swollen lip. Dermot's heart hammered in his massive chest, and his giant hands trembled at his sides as he marched in long, furious steps toward the confrontation. Just as he reached them, the music died suddenly, and the house lights came up, erasing the sexy atmosphere and causing many patrons to whine.
Oi!
Called a voice from the balcony above, and looking up, Dermit saw his brother Cormac rushing down the stairs toward them. Dermit reached the angry man in the suit first, and calling upon a monumental level of internal restraint, he did not grab the patron and crush his body into a pinstriped meatball. Instead, he slid in between the man and the dancers and stood there, a tower of glaring flesh.
Whoa! Okay now, seriously?
The suited man shouted, throwing up his hands. There was cocaine around his nostrils and on his collar.
Somebody come get this ugly gorilla out of my face right now Before you what?
Cormac stomped into view, his blue eyes burning in his handsome face, with its light and dark patches. He wore a diamond earring and gold chain necklace, a tailored denim jacket and jeans, and a sleek pair of Nikes. Cormac wasn't alone. On his heels, clipboard under one arm, marched Whiskey Blaze. Whiskey Blaze was dressed in a cowgirl-inspired outfit for her performance later. The hard-working woman was somehow able to not only efficiently manage the lusty shamrock, but also put on one hell of a show 3 nights a week.
Let's say we take the temperature down a bit here, eh, boys? That bitch!
The patron screamed, stabbing a finger in the air to point through Dermit's chest.
Scratched me! Look!
He turned his stupid face to reveal 2 small, pink lines on his right cheek. Dermit's eyes twitched. Said Whiskey Blaze, remaining level-headed as always.
And what was it that you did, sir, in the seconds leading up to that altercation? Oh, shut up! When I put about $1,000 down in 20s, I think I'm entitled to grab a bit of...
The man did not get a chance to finish this sentiment, for he suddenly found himself dangling several feet off the floor, held up by a giant hand, squeezing the top of his head. He kicked out with his feet and grabbed uselessly at the muscular arm that held him.
Oh my God! Stop!
Dermit growled, which shut up the bastard.
Hey, Smash,
said Cormac.
You've made your point now, man. Put him down, okay?
Dermot's face flinched, and he showed his teeth.
Dermit,
said a soft, sweet voice from directly behind him.
It's okay. I'm okay. Really.
After a moment, Dermit exhaled and released his grip on the man's head. He fell in a heap to the floor, knocking over a chair and banging his chin on his own knee. When he rose up again, shaking and disheveled, one of his front teeth was missing.
I'm pressing charges!
He screamed.
Do you assholes even know who you're messing with?
Cormac moved around and got right in his face.
No fucking idea.
Shifting aside his denim jacket, he revealed the Sig Sauer P226 at his waist.
Do you, dumbass?
The man looked from the handgun to Cormac's narrowed eyes and swallowed.
You need to leave now, sir,
Whiskey told the patron. Then she turned and waved up to the DJ on the balcony, and at once, the party lighting and music resumed. The patron straightened his tie and turned to go, but Dermit let out a little grunt.
Smasher's right,
said Cormac, glaring at the man.
You are no longer welcome in this establishment. Ever.
The patron scoffed and shrugged, but Dermit whipped to glare down at his brother, one eyelid twitching.
Seriously, Smash?
Cormac said under his breath, before exhaling and grabbing the man by the elbow as he tried to walk away.
What's more,
he went on,
if you ever show your face in Little Dublin again, I will personally shoot you in the fucking head. Is that clear?
The man's eyes went wide. He nodded, then ran for the doors.
Jesus, it's one fucking mess after another,
Cormac grumbled when he had gone. The dancer supporting Lotus had returned to the stage, and sauntering to its center, she raised one slender arm and let her fingertips trail up the shining pole there. The patrons hooted in approval, and as Cormac pivoted to watch, the dancer hooked one ankle around the pole and launched herself in a fluid spin. Dermit turned and looked down at Lotus, who now had a wad of napkins pressed to her mouth. They locked eyes, the giant with the bulging muscles and this light and delicate woman, and in that moment, much passed between their faces in silence. But as Cormac turned to face them, Lotus averted her gaze and allowed Whiskey Blaze to help her to a back room to clean up. Dermit started toward the exit to return to his post outside, but his brother swatted him on the arm.
Hang back a minute, Smash. Young Fitz has got the door, right? Come with me, I could use you.
Dermit followed Cormac to a quiet back corner of the club, away from the stage and blasting music, where ambient lighting glowed down on a dozen pool tables. 2 men in black suits were shooting a game, and when they saw the brothers approaching, they exchanged a look, then straightened up, leaning on their pool cues.
Evening, gents,
said Cormac, coming to a stop across the table and pulling out a cigarette case.
You two enjoying yourselves?
The men did not answer, but looked from one brother to the other as Cormac lit a cigarette with his lighter and took a long pull. Blowing smoke out of the corner of his mouth, he said,
It has not escaped my attention that you have now returned to the Lusty Shamrock for the 3rd night in a row.
The more sly and confident of the 2 men sniffed a laugh.
So? It's a nice joint you got here. Lovely entertainment. Good drinks. A bit pricey, though. Bullshit,
said Cormac with a tired sigh.
Look, I got enough on my plate right now without dealing with this. So let's cut to the chase.
Raising the hand with the cigarette, he pointed with 2 fingers at the first man.
You are Special Agent Tippett with the FBI.
As the agent's grin faded, Cormac turned to point at the other.
And you are Special Agent Cohen with the ATF.
The second agent swallowed nervously. Cormac took another puff on the cigarette, then nodded.
As you already know, I am Cormac McMurra, also known as Mad Cow. And my associate here is my baby brother Dermit McMurra, also known as Smasher. And we are dangerous men. Now then, with that out of the way, obviously your agencies have been watching our family's business for years. So the fact that you're showing up like this now, either you're trying to send a message or you're after an audience. Which is it?
A heavy moment of speechlessness followed, broken only when the whooping of horny voices back by the stage filled the air. The dancer must have pulled off a difficult move, or perhaps an article of clothing. Exhaling, Special Agent Tippett set his pool cue on the table.
All right then. You two are not the ones we need to talk to.
Cormac blew another cloud.
Okay, fine. You want to meet the Queen? Let's take a walk to the castle. In fact, if we hurry,
Tilting his right arm, Cormac checked the time on his Rolex.
we might get there before she finishes her last cigar and heads off to bed.
Without another word, Cormac spun and marched back through the room. The federal agents exchanged another cautious glance, then looked up at Smasher. He gave them a little smile and held out one giant hand, indicating that they should go first. The feds followed Cormac out, with the hulking Dermit taking up the rear. Despite the late hour, the borough of Little Dublin was bustling and lively as the 4 men walked out of the club. Dock workers in dirty work boots and flannel jackets laughed and argued and shuffled about in groups on the sidewalks. Teens in hoodies and baggy jeans practiced kick flips on their skateboards in the street. On the balconies of the apartments on either side of the street, older couples sat and smoked and watched the young folk below, with mingled annoyance and jealousy. And everyone present, as soon as they saw Cormac and Dermit approaching, grew quiet and nodded respectfully as these 2 princes of the Celtic cartel passed by.
Hey, Mad Cow!
Called a teenage girl, smoking a blunt with friends outside a 24-hour laundromat.
Evening, ladies,
said Cormac with a wink, which elicited a good deal of girlish giggling. Strings of little Irish flags were hung across the main road as they turned onto it, and many streamers of green, white, and orange could be seen in the businesses there. St. Patrick's Day was next week, and Little Dublin always put on one hell of a parade. Cormac led them around another corner and down a quieter lane, where the high brick walls were coated with many layers of graffiti. A few recent spray-painted additions stood out, including the phrases, "Fuck the Brits!" and "Freedom for Ireland!" There was even an extraordinarily lifelike portrait of the British monarch's severed head.
Glad to see that art isn't dead,
joked Agent Tippett, and his colleague chuckled nervously. They came up to the docks. A creamy fog hung above the dark waters in the bay beyond. Turning left along the wharf, Cormac flicked his cigarette to the ground as he walked up to the dark green door of a nondescript pub that faced the water. Above its misted windows hung the establishment sign, which read, in gold letters, "The Ballygub," over the painted image of a stone cottage on a green hill. Cormac opened the pub's door, and the scents of beer and cigarettes wafted out, along with the sound of a fiddle, but Agent Tippett stayed outside, staring up at the sign.
What's the story with that name? He asked. Ballygub. Is that an old Irish Gaelic word for something? Sure,
said Cormac.
What's it mean? Your sister's vagina. We going in or not?
Cormac turned and disappeared inside. The agents followed. Sniffing a breath of the sea air, Dermit bent and moved in last, shutting the door behind him. The Ballygub had a far more mellow vibe than the lusty Shamrock, and though the bar and the little tables were all full tonight, the clientele was older, and content with quiet jokes and conversations over their pints. In the far corner, beside the dartboards, the fiddler was playing an old Irish ditty. Behind the bar, old Fitz narrowed his eyes behind his glasses as he surveyed the two strangers in their black suits.
"Evening, lads,"
said the bartender. Old Fitz's sideburns and ponytail were mostly gray now.
"Everything all right?"
Yeah, Fitz,
said Cormac, weaving through the tables toward the back hall.
just some visitors for Ma.
"Ah, right."
Nodded Fitz, leaning on the bar and pressing a button beneath the counter with one thumb. From the floor above them, barely audible, an electric buzzer sounded.
"All grand, Mr. Dermit?"
asked the barman as the huge man passed him. Dermit nodded. The four moved into the back hall, past the bathroom, then up a musty staircase, which creaked with their every step. Coming to a hall above, Cormac walked briskly down to the door at the end and gave it a quick tap before swinging it open and stepping inside. As the federal agents followed him into the personal office of the infamous crime boss, they were both taken aback by the austere nature of the room. It was dim and dusty, with wood-paneled walls and not much bigger than the average bedroom. Two tall, thin Irish wolfhounds lay on a very large, very hairy dog bed in the corner by the desk. And though the dogs were resting and didn't look particularly dangerous, the smell of their fur was strong in the room. Behind the desk, a woman with gray streaks in her red hair sat in a swivel chair, with her back to them, facing a window that looked out over the bay. She must have heard them enter, but she did not move, except to lean back her head and blow a stream of silver-blue smoke at the ceiling. The only other person in the room was a small and rather odd man, in the corner to their left, sitting on a stool with his legs crossed. He wore only a threadbare robe, like something out of medieval times, and had faded green tattoos all over his exposed arms and legs and neck. The top of his head was bald and shiny, but he had a wiry beard, braided and threaded with colorful beads. The man cackled when they entered, making Agent Tippett jump.
Yikes. What the hell are you supposed to be then?
"I'm the druid, so I am. Keeper of the good book."
He motioned with one skeletal hand to his side, where an old wooden lectern held open a heavy, antique Bible, spread open. Tippett shook his head.
You people are so weird.
He grumbled, and took a step toward the old book, thumbing through a few yellowed pages.
Can you even read this tiny text? With those crazy eyes of yours?
The druid cackled a third time.
"Ah, there's druid magic in me eyes, good sir."
Uh-huh. I didn't know pagans were interested in the Holy Bible.
"And I didn't know a man's Mickey could come in such a teeny tiny size,"
countered the druid, pointing at the agent's crotch.
"Me eyes are magic, don't forget. I see all, including your sidearm there. Though, I'm armed as well, mind ya."
The druid twisted on his stool, revealing a holstered dagger at his belt. Both federal agents tensed at this, but Cormac cleared his throat and said,
That's enough, druid. Sorry for the late visit, Ma, but you've got company. These are...
Mairead spun in her chair to face them, her blue eyes flashing violet in the fiery glow of her cigar. One of the wolfhounds on the floor looked up sharply as their master moved. Blowing out another cloud of cigar smoke, Mairead McMurra said,
"Tippett and Cohen, the bastard's trying to make my boys nervous."
She sneered at them, one at a time.
"So what the fuck can I do for you then?"
Agent Tippett stepped closer to the desk, sliding his hands in the pockets of his suit coat.
Miss McMurra, it's a pleasure to finally meet you face to face.
She squinted up at him from behind the desk. Her face had grown wrinkled and her voice gravelly over the years, but the fierceness of the woman's tone and expression was all the stronger.
"I asked you a question, Tippett."
Clearing his throat nervously, Agent Cohen stepped up beside his colleague.
Well, you should know, ma'am, that the federal government has quite a lot of incriminating information on you and your operation here.
He said, straightening his glasses.
Drug trafficking,
illegal gambling, prostitution, money laundering, bribery, to name a few.
Back in his corner, the druid laughed. Mairead cracked a wry smile.
Is that right?
She drew on her cigar.
You go after me. You bring this whole city government crashing down. And you should know, fellas, that I have quite a lot of incriminating information on some very powerful people, including a few of your superiors down in Washington.
Ignoring her threat, Agent Tippett continued where his colleague had left off.
You could also be facing charges for multiple assaults, kidnappings, and
Glancing up over his shoulder, he looked at Dermit.
executions of quite a lot of your criminal competitors.
He turned back to Mairead.
All that? It would make a hell of a RICO case. A lot of agents would give their left nut for a crack at a case like that.
I don't have time for your left nut, Tippett,
said Mairead.
Why are you here?
The agents exchanged a look.
Ireland,
Agent Cohen finally said.
that's why we're here.
Ire's here.
The druid declared suddenly.
Free Ireland.
Tippett rolled his eyes.
That island of yours has been in a state of civil unrest and violence for 30 years.
He said, as if she didn't already know this.
And as you are no doubt aware, peace talks are now underway in the city of Belfast. The United States government is doing everything we can to ensure that those talks go smoothly.
Mairead did not hide her disgust at his words.
Fuck the bloody peace talks.
I figured you'd say that,
said Tippett, turning to Cohen.
We know, ma'am,
said the ATF agent.
that the Celtic cartel has been supplying not only funds, but also military-grade weapons to some of the most radical members of the Irish Republican Army. You're funding terrorists!
Shouted Tippett. His eyes narrowed to meet hers.
And you're doing so at a time when any IRA attack could bring an end of those negotiations and lead to decades more strife for your countrymen.
Mairead grinned and looked at Cormac.
You hear that, boys? It seems these men are here to help Irish people. Surely that has nothing to do with ensuring a political win for the US government's current administration,
Which could surely use one right about now. Ma'am,
Agent Cohen began again, but Mairead slammed her fist suddenly upon the desk, causing ash and embers to spring from the tip of her cigar.
you don't have shite on me.
She screamed, and both wolfhounds jumped up nervously.
'Cause if you had even a scrap of evidence beyond the prison rumors of some low-life thug, I'd already be in handcuffs. And we both know it. So go back to your bosses in D.C. to tell President Clinton that Mairead McMurra says he can go fuck himself or find another intern to do it for him.
Tippett opened his mouth to speak again, but Cormac turned to him.
you should really go.
He said, as one of the wolfhounds let out a low whimper.
As in, right fucking now.
Agent Cohen didn't have to be told twice. Turning on his heel, he moved to the door, but Tippett stood in place for a few more seconds, smirking.
You sure got some real weirdos on your crew, ma'am.
He said to Mairead.
You,
He added, looking at Cormac.
tell the DJ at your little club that they can play something besides remixes of U2 and the Cranberries.
Then Agent Tippett, too, left, and Dermit shut the door behind them. Once they were gone, Cormac and Mairead both exhaled tensely, and the druid chuckled. Dermit remained silent and looked over at the dogs. One of them circled and lay back down. The other came trotting toward Dermit, who leaned to scratch her between the eyes.
Nicely handled, Ma,
said Cormac, walking over to look out the window to watch the federal agents exit the pub and head down the street.
but those fuckers will be back.
I know it.
Said Mairead.
Druid, check the book. What's the next shipment set to leave for Fennett?
The eccentric little bookkeeper hopped off his stool and stretched, his knees popping, then turned to the Bible on its lectern. Shutting the heavy book, he picked it up, flipped it over, and set it back down, upside down. Lifting open the back cover, he revealed the book's second set of pages, where a hidden ledger of meticulously recorded dates and transactions were written.
Druid magic,
The bookkeeper declared, as he always did when performing this little illusion, though one could purchase a similar trick book in any magic shop.
Let's see, We've a load of Armalites and RPGs going out on Tuesday morning, just before the parade. No, too risky now. Push it, at least a week.
She spoke over her shoulder to Cormac.
And what about the trouble with the loan shark downtown? Have you all... Oi, Smasher, I can see you in the reflection. Where are you sneaking off to then?
Dermit had patted the dogs on the head and turned silently to exit the office, but now stopped, cringing as his mother called to him. One giant hand still on the doorknob, he turned his head to face her and Cormac. Letting out a little grunt, his face flinched and his shoulders jittered. This caused Mairead to cringe and bite down on her cigar.
What's he saying?
She snapped at Cormac.
Just that he's meeting young Fitz for a drink. Is he now? All right then. But don't wait so long next time to pay your old ma a visit, eh?
Dermit looked at the floor, nodded, then opened the door and ducked into the hall. Back inside the office, Cormac turned back to the window and stared at the bay.
While I'm here, we gotta talk about the docks, Ma. What about them?
We need more guys. Again.
Mairead still had her sharp eyes fixed on the door as Dermot's footsteps faded.
Huh? More guys? Take some of Fergal's boys.
Cormac shook his head.
Nah, they're all working transpo now. Fergal can't spare them. We've talked about this, Ma.
For decades, Mairead McMurra had been using the docks to train up her men before promoting them to posts around the city and beyond. It was a good system. It kept her lieutenants loyal, but they tended to take their guys with them when they moved up, leaving the docks short-handed and leaving Cormac to take up the slack. Pulling out his case, Cormac lit himself another cigarette.
I got about 500 Korean TVs sitting on a freighter out there, and nobody to haul them in before inspectors show up.
Mairead tried to take another pull on her cigar, but realized she had practically bit off the end in her irritation. Grumbling, she set it down in an ashtray on the desk.
I'll make a call to your Uncle Eamon. He'll send over a fresh batch of...
We don't have time for that, Ma,
said Cormac, raising his voice to speak over her.
And if your little attack in Belfast goes down next month, they'll need all their boys over there for the fighting that's to follow. We need to address this, now.
She finally turned to him, and her mouth twitched with a proud smile.
My little businessman,
she said.
I know you, Cormac. You don't come to your ma with a problem unless you already have a solution in mind. So, how do you want to handle it?
Cormac took a drag on the cigarette, then exhaled through his nostrils.
There's a new crew in town. I want to take them in, under our wing.
Mairead raised an eyebrow.
Irish? Nah, Russians. Commies?
I don't know their politics, Ma, but they're big and strong, and no one to shut up.
Are they connected?
To the Red Mafia in New York? Don't think so. Though the crew leader's got a brother, who's a big shot in London, supposedly. The guy here is named Volkov. Ivan Volkov. They call him the Bear.
Why?
Cormac shrugged.
'Cause he's fucking hairy. How the fuck should I know? But the brains of the outfit is the Bear's wife. Zoya. You'll like her. She's smart, no nonsense. And don't worry, I know they can't be trusted, but...
Of course they can't be bloody trusted,
Mairead sneered, spinning fully around in her chair to look out the window with him.
Only a fool relies on trust. Control. That's all that matters.
Cormac nodded.
I can control them. Oh, and about that bookie, the Bulgarian, you were right. His numbers aren't adding up. He's been skimming all year. I'll take Smasher down there this weekend. We'll handle it.
As Mairead stared down at the street, the front door of the pub opened, leaking a rectangle of light over the dark asphalt, and she watched as a huge shape moved out into the night.
What's going on with your brother?
She asked, her eyes narrowing on the sight of Dermit as he turned left, not toward the club, and walked off along the wharf.
Smash? He's fine. No, he's acted distant with me,
she said. Then, in response to Cormac's chuckle,
more than usual, I mean. Been getting worse the last few months.
He's fine, Ma,
Cormac repeated. Mairead stiffened.
Nah, something's up.
She turned to her other son, the son like her, the one she actually understood.
Put eyes on him.
Cormac froze, cigarette hanging from his lips.
Eyes on Dermit? He's our head assassin. Not to mention Are you serious?
Though there was no lit cigar in front of them now, Mairead's eyes burned with the fiery glow anyway.
As the fucking grave.
After a moment, Cormac nodded, then turned, bid her and the druid a good night, and departed. Mairead McMurra turned back to the window, hugging her arms around her chest and squeezing. Control. It wasn't easy, controlling a business empire, a criminal syndicate, a whole city. But she did it. Every fucking day. She got out of bed, she came here to the office, and she put out 1,000 fucking fires and lit 1,000 more. She understood it. The game, the nature of power, the violence, the money, the delicate balance of it all. And when, on the rare occasion something did crop up that Mairead could not understand, that she couldn't control, she disposed of it, with one exception. One very, very big exception. Outside, the hulking silhouette of her youngest son turned a corner into an alley and disappeared from view. And behind her office window, his mother bared her smoke-stained teeth in a grimace and snarled. The bells at St. Hulvard's Cathedral were ringing after the mid-morning Sunday Mass. The priest waited outside, atop the front steps, to shake hands, give blessings, and hand out flyers to the families that poured from the church doors and moved out into the streets of Little Dublin. The parishioners at St. Hulvard's looked much as one would expect. The fathers in suits, the mothers in modest dresses, the children pulling off their itchy sweaters as soon as they were outside. There were no obvious clues that most of those men and some of the women were engaged daily in criminal activity and violence of every type. The priest certainly wasn't too concerned, and was all too happy to accept the donations and protections of Mairead McMurra. Waving as the last churchgoers exited the building, he delivered his final, "Go in the peace of the Lord," to the gangsters without any sense of irony. Most of the Celtic cartel families headed south down the main road, but two of the young men broke away, turning west.
Where you two running off to?
Old Fitz called to them.
Just grabbing some lunch downtown,
answered young Fitz, as he and Dermit made their way toward the Odin's Gate Bridge.
You can grab your lunch at the pub,
his father complained.
You don't serve chow mein.
As they walked, young Fitz glanced down at the pamphlet the priest had handed him. It showed an illustration of a high brick tower with stained glass windows, and two bulldozers were sketched to move ominously in from either side. The pamphlet read, "Save All Saints Monastery." Rolling his eyes, Fitz crumpled up the page and tossed it into a garbage can. The sky was gray and a crisp breeze stung their eyes as they walked across the bridge. Young Fitz tightened the newsboy cap he wore, then flipped up the collar of his suit jacket and stuffed his hands in his pockets. Dermit, hulking along beside his friend, didn't mind the breeze in his long orange hair and breathed in the salty taste of the bay through his nostrils. His hands were much too large to fit in any pockets. Once across the bridge, they glanced up briefly at the towering downtown skyline, but soon turned down a modest side street. The city of Grim Bay didn't have so much of a Chinatown as it did a China alley, and red paper lanterns hung above the street, bouncing in the spring breeze. Passing by the family-run convenience store, grocers, herbal medicine shop, and mahjong parlor, the two men ducked into a little noodle house on the corner. Even bent low and turned to the side, Dermit could hardly fit through the door. Once inside, the cook behind the counter smiled and nodded to them both. Young Fitz clapped Dermit on the arm, then moved to take a corner table as the cook prepared as usual. Dermit, meanwhile, ducked past the counter, down the dim hall, and out the back, where he emerged into a small, grimy courtyard between old brick tenement buildings. He was just about to climb up the nearest fire escape when a tiny sound made him look down. From between two overflowing garbage cans, there limped a very small, very frail, three-legged kitten with gunky eyes and matted white fur. Dermit stared at it. Then, lowering himself to the ground, he cocked his giant head and smiled. The kitten cocked its tiny head and meowed again. Laying the back of one massive hand down before the animal, Dermit waited patiently. After another 30 seconds, the kitten crept up to sniff at his fingers, then walked cautiously onto his palm. Rising, Dermit gently scooped it up and plopped the kitten into his breast pocket. Turning, Dermit began to ascend the fire escape, not moving up its stairs, on which he would never fit, but climbing swiftly up the outside, moving floor to floor with grace and surprising quietness, like some great ape in the jungle. Upon reaching the roof, he swung his legs up and landed gently on the terrace there, where a jumble of pots held 100 varieties of flowers. Reaching to his pocket, he removed the kitten, which bit him on the thumb before allowing him to rub her head with a fingertip. To his right, from an apartment on an adjoining building, a window squeaked open. Dermit looked over, and there, framed in the window and with a pink flower in her hair, Lotus raised an eyebrow.
Really, sweetheart? Another stray?
Dermit gave a sheepish smile. She laughed lightly, and climbing out of the window onto the terrace, she dusted herself off and walked toward him.
So what should we call this little lady?
She asked. Dermit murmured in his throat and nodded at the little cat.
Do you mean it's a boy?
He nodded again.
How can you tell?
He shrugged. Lotus clicked her tongue and shook her head, then winked.
You and your hidden talents.
She was barely 5 feet tall, and when she stretched up on tiptoes to kiss him, he had to kneel for her to reach him, carefully cupping the kitten in one hand and bowing his head to hers. Her lips were soft and cool against his, though he could feel the raised cut where she had been hit in the club a few days before. She lifted her hands to hold his face, and as her fingers touched lightly against his skin, he shuddered, not in pain, but in overwhelming tenderness. Breaking away from the kiss, she smiled into his eyes, which were blue as a clear sky.
I missed you,
she whispered, and he chuckled.
I know it's only been a few hours, but I wasn't complaining. I like it, having someone to miss. Not everyone has that.
He lowered his massive arm to set down the kitten, then snatched Lotus lightly at the waist and lifted her into the air.
You,
he said, kissing her again. They were interrupted by the kitten, which began attacking Dermit's bootlaces. It began to rain, fat drops striking the back of Dermit's head. He bent to set Lotus back on her feet and nodded toward the apartment window, but she shook her head.
I don't mind the rain,
she said.
It's good for the flowers.
She turned to the corner of the terrace, where she laid out bricks into a 10-foot square and planted grass within. It wasn't much, that tiny lawn, but it was theirs. Taking his giant hand in her small grip, she led him over to the grass and, giggling, moved to sit in the middle. He squinted at her, mouth twitching. She sniffed a laugh.
Who cares if my dress is dirty?
He grinned. At first, it had been difficult for Lotus to read the meaning in Dermit McMurra's expressions, because she had assumed there must be a vocabulary to it. Private words, subtle grammar, subtext, and secrets. But no. His reactions and emotions were simple, straightforward, for those who bothered to accept his truth. It was everyone else who was difficult to read, Lotus realized, with their lies and their judgment and their games. There was nothing secret about Dermit, and that was his secret. As he lowered himself onto the grass beside her, his long legs poking out the end of the square, she looked at him and she saw him. All his quiet strength, his deep-set pain, his desperate desire to love. She saw it all, so plainly on his face. Others saw something else in those features. They saw ugliness, something to be laughed at, something to be feared, a monster, even, a creature of violence. She knew about all that, of course. She knew the things they made him do, all his life, just as she knew how easy the world found it to judge a person based on their circumstances, instead of their heart. She got enough of that judgment down at the club, and before working there, she had gotten it in a brothel down the street, and before that, back when she was just a little girl, in a brothel in Shanghai. The world was so cruel, and yet... "You," she said, smiling as the rain fell harder. "You are so beautiful." He looked at her and blinked water from his eyes. Must be the rain. She pushed him gently on the chest, and he lowered himself onto his back in the wet grass, shivering as the chilly wetness soaked his shirt. Glancing over, he saw that the three-legged kitten had found a dry spot beneath a potted bush and was fast asleep. Lotus curled up beside him, her head against his neck, her hand on his chest. He wrapped the fingers of one hand around her shoulder, and while the spring rain fell, they held each other in their little patch of paradise, lifted up high above the slums of hell. The sun finally came out from the clouds that evening, just in time to set and paint the sky with gold and fire and blood. Dermit could not see that sunset. He was sitting in the back of a windowless work van, hunched and hugging his knees, jostling back and forth as the vehicle headed down the winding streets west of town, where big, bland, identical houses stood beside golf courses and country clubs. Dermit usually liked to keep his mind blank on these particular journeys, trips to job sites. But after spending the afternoon on the roof terrace with Lotus, it was impossible to zone out. His heart was too full. His skin, it still tingled with the echo of her touch. And when he breathed in through his large nostrils, beyond the grimy scents of the van, he could still smell her hair, clean, floral, like a garden. The van pulled to a stop, and Dermit shook himself, trying to throw off the emotions, to empty himself so that he might go through the task at hand without caring, without snapping. The rear doors swung open, and Dermit wiggled awkwardly to get his legs out, then stood. They had parked in a gravel alley beside a large house. The first stars were coming out, and crickets were chirping from a nearby tree. The driver of the van, a one-armed gangster named Mooney, looked around cautiously, then up at Dermit.
"This here's a bookie's place. He's a feckin' cheat. So Mom wants to send a message and..."
Dermit glared down at him, and he raised his one hand in mock surrender.
"You don't want to know. Gotcha. No worries, Smasher. Just follow me."
They moved around the corner of the van and headed toward the back of the house, but that's when young Fitz came walking up to meet them.
"I'll take him in, Mooney,"
said Fitz.
"You wait in the van."
Mooney shrugged.
"Suit yourself."
Dermot's eyelids twitched in concern, but young Fitz turned and started slowly back into the shadows. Once they were out of earshot of the driver, he whispered,
"Something's up, man. It's Cormac. He's getting paranoid, or I don't know."
They turned the corner of the house and headed for the back door, but Fitz stopped just outside of it.
"Dermit, he's ordered me to keep an eye on you and report back. He knows something's up."
In the darkness, Dermot's nostrils flared.
"I know, and I'll only tell him what you want me to, of course, but, well, you know he's weird about the women at the club, so I think maybe you should stick around Little Dublin for a few days."
A grumble rose in Dermot's throat, and at his sides, his bulbous knuckles popped as his hands squeezed into sledgehammer fists. Fitz sighed and moved to open the back door and usher Dermit inside. His huge body beginning to tremble, Dermit ducked through the doorway, entering a sitting room with the lights off and the blinds drawn. Across the room, another gangster was waiting beside an open door with a light on within.
What's up, Smasher? Mad Gal's in the basement with him,
the man said, shifting aside. Dermit marched forward, head bowed, eyes blazing. Flying down the carpeted stairs, he found himself crouching in an open-plan basement. A leather couch faced an entertainment center. A foosball table sat in one corner, and on one shelf, board games were stacked beside crates labeled Christmas and baby clothes. And in the middle of the basement, under a fluorescent light, a family of 4 was gagged and tied to chairs. Cormac was standing behind them, one foot bouncing anxiously, his Sig Sauer in one hand, now with a suppressor screwed onto its threaded barrel. 2 more of his men stood by a table in the back, going through the paperwork.
Hey, Smash, said Cormac. Pretty straightforward job tonight. We need you to...
Keeping his eye on his brother, so as not to look at the family, Dermit swept across the room, seized the head of the first gagged figure in both hands, and crushed it.
What the fuck?
Grunted Cormac, jumping backward as blood and brain splattered his jeans.
Put the fucking bag over them first and...
The 3 others in the chairs were all screaming through their gags. Dermit moved to the next family member and slammed his fists together on their skull.
Christ, Smash!
Smasher growled in his throat and snatched his hand over the next head. It was smaller than the first 2.
What's gotten into you?
Dermit flexed his fingers, feeling the skull creak and crack under his grip. From the head, a high, child's groan issued through the gag. Dermit flinched, and before he could stop himself, his gaze flicked downward. He saw a light brown ponytail with a Minnie Mouse hair tie poking out between his index and middle fingers. He gasped and released the girl, stumbling backward.
What the actual hell, Smash?
Said Cormac, shaking his head. The girl continued to groan as blood poured down her face and ears. Cormac raised his pistol and shot her in the back of the head. Turning, he aimed at the last family member, a young boy, and shot him. Dermit began to hyperventilate, his chest swelling and head striking the popcorn ceiling with each deep gasp. Cormac sighed, lowering his smoking pistol.
What a fucking mess. Seriously, Smash, what's gotten over you lately?
With an enormous effort, Dermit slowed his breathing, and baring his teeth, his gaze snapped up to his brother's. Cormac cocked his head.
What? You don't want to be here right now? No shit. We have a job to do. Get control of yourself.
Dermot's jaws tightened, teeth grinding. At his sides, his hands were shaking, dripping blood into the carpet. Cormac shook his head.
Sometimes I wonder, man, how someone so strong can be so fucking weak.
Smasher awoke from a nightmare late the next morning, sitting up on the 2 mattresses laid end to end in his sparsely furnished room above the pub. He rubbed his head in his hands before remembering the night before, and looking down, saw the red stains upon his skin. It was always so hard to wash away, all that blood. The floorboards creaked as he got to his feet, crouching to avoid the light fixture. Sunlight was streaming in through the window, and he could hear a few voices chatting boisterously from downstairs. Tomorrow was St. Patrick's Day, and the busiest day of the year for the Ballygub. Yawning, he pulled on his boots and opened the bedroom door. One of the wolfhounds was standing in the hall outside and looking up at him. He smiled down at the dog, but from his mother's office, he heard the druid call to the animal, and it turned with a whimper, ears drooping, and sauntered away down the hall. Dermit heard the office door close. When he came down the pub stairs a few minutes later, dressed and with his hair brushed back and tucked behind his large ears, he saw a few locals at the bar, and young Fitz's sister Jenny standing on a stool to hang a chain of glittering shamrocks across the room.
Morning, Mr. Dermit,
said old Fitz.
Or should I say, afternoon. Fancy a fry-up?
Dermit shook his head and walked through the pub and out the front door. He stood for a moment on the sidewalk outside, blinking in the dazzling sunlight, though the breeze was crisp. His stomach growled. He was hungry, but not for a fry-up. He wanted noodles. Crossing his arms to hug his hands around his chest, he trudged down the road in the direction of Odin's Gate Bridge. Lotus would be home again today, tending to her flowers on the roof. Monday was her day off. Fitz had been right, of course. Dermit would be wise to stay away for now, to let things simmer down, to be patient. But he couldn't. He had been alone so long, invisible in the dark, and now he had been seen. He couldn't help it. The light called to him. Lotus, she called to him. As soon as Dermit turned into the street with the red paper lanterns, he knew something was wrong. It was too empty, even for a Monday. And as he glanced around at the shops, faces that had been looking out through the storefront windows suddenly turned away. Senses tingling, he sped up, his boots pounding the pavement. He came up to the noodle shop, but saw that the blinds were closed and the open sign had been turned off. Dermot's mouth went dry. He looked up at the buildings rising around him, but he didn't know where her apartment was. He had never come in through the front door before. Lunging into a run, he charged down a nearby alley that led to the trash-filled courtyard behind the restaurant. A gate and a high chain-link fence ahead was locked, but Dermit didn't even slow down. Headbutting through the gate, he hurried through the courtyard, leapt, and grabbed at the second-story railing of the fire escape. He climbed with ferocious energy, bending the bars and rattling screws loose until he reached the top and jumped up onto the terrace. His boots crunched down, flattening the blossoms of a dozen snowdrops. The flowers lay scattered on the rooftop, their pot broken on its side. Dermit stood frozen on the spot, his gaze panning from left to right, from the grassy square over potted plants to her apartment window, which was open, the curtains fluttering. Swallowing, he moved to the window and, leaning down, peered inside. The room was dim and completely empty. No furniture, no kitten, no Lotus. Dermit let out an agonized groan and swooned. Staggering backward, he turned, his vision spinning wildly, his eyelids peeled back and his pupils wide. He felt afraid, so afraid. The fear was a storm inside his head, and from its swirling depths, a sharp crack of violent anger, like lightning, flared within him. He ran back to the edge and jumped, spinning midair and grabbing the fire escape railing. It snapped under his grip and he plummeted 60 feet, then punched down with both fists, crushing the lowest level of the fire escape to slow his wild descent. He landed with knees bent, shaking the ground, then shot forward with a grunt, hurtling down the alleyway. Several people screamed and fell backward to the sidewalk as Dermit sprinted from the alley and charged down the street. His long legs flew and his great fists beat the air as he came up to a busy intersection and raced through the traffic. A bus honked and two distracted drivers got into a fender bender as he charged past. Reaching the bridge, he sped across it, salty wind in his hair, his furious eyes fixed on his target ahead, on Little Dublin. In the lusty shamrock, Cormac's hands were shaking as he pulled out a cigarette, and it took him 3 tries to get his lighter to work and light it. Sucking in a shaky breath, he closed his eyes. He stayed up the last 2 nights, trying to keep everything together. The club, the docks, that new Russian crew, those fucking feds, Tippett and Cohen, and the goddamn parade tomorrow. Not to mention, he exhaled, trying not to think about the early hours of this morning, and opened his eyes.
Oi!
He called out, seeing 2 of his men starting up a game of pool in the back.
Did I fucking say it was playtime? No! Then get back to work. There's 2 broken urinals in the men's room clogged with pubes and piss, and the goddamn VIP lounges need a deep clean. Now!
Setting down their pool cues, the gangsters hurried off without complaint. As it was midday, the club was closed, brightly lit with fluorescent house lights, and the only music was the buzz of a vacuum and the clinking of clean glasses being put away behind the bar. Cormac blew a line of gray smoke at the ceiling, feeling a migraine start to blossom behind his eyes. Then, from the front hall, he heard the door swing open, and a scream, and a great deal of stomping.
Okay, fuck,
Cormac muttered to himself, taking another drag on the cigarette to try and steady his nerves. He had to get this over with. Dermit marched from the hall and across the room.
Hey, Smasher,
Said Cormac, trying to smile.
I was wondering when you'd get here to...
Dermit whipped one great fist at a table in his way, sweeping it into the air. It struck the wall and burst into pieces. Cormac flinched. As his younger brother stomped up to him, Cormac saw young Fitz and a couple of his guys hurrying in after. One of the men reached for his sidearm, but Cormac caught his eye and gave a quick shake of the head.
Smash, listen,
Cormac began, but reaching him, Dermit leaned over, breathing hard, his lips bared. Cormac inhaled.
Just take a deep breath, okay? Let's talk.
Cormac exhaled, then nodded.
Okay, I'm not gonna bullshit you, man. That girl, we moved her to another club up the coast, okay? I don't even know where, seriously. But that's how it worked with the dancers, you know that.
Dermit leaned closer, his throat rumbling.
And, frankly, you don't need any distractions right now, alright? None of us do. But there'll be another time, and other chicks, and... He's lying!
Shouted a voice from above. Cormac froze, his blue eyes wide. Dermit looked up at the balcony. Whiskey Blaze was standing outside the club office in a hoodie and sweatpants, hugging her arms around her chest. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying.
It was me, Derm,
she said, her voice weak.
It was me that told Corm about you two. I'm sorry, but I never thought...
Her lower lip began to tremble.
They...
Dermot's heart seemed to turn to ice in his chest.
And then they just threw her in the trash, Dermit.
Cormac winced, clasping his eyes shut.
Oh, Jesus.
Whiskey sniffed and wiped at her eyes.
They said Fengle will swing by later to take her away because they'll need space in the dumpster for the fucking parade.
Dermit stared up at her, his expression blank, his body numb. The club melted in his vision as tears filled his eyes. Cormac tried to take another drag on the cigarette, but his hand was shaking so hard he dropped it. It hit the ground with a tiny puff of sparks.
Oh God! Oh fuck, smash!
And now his blue eyes just like Dermot's. They were moist too.
I swear, man, I didn't want to have to.
Dermot's right arm snapped forward, clutching his fingers around his brother's face. Cormac seized, kicking out. Behind them, men cursed and pulled out their pistols. Dermit turned and marched forward, his boots stomping on the lit cigarette with a hiss, dragging Cormac by the head while his brother fought back, swinging both hands uselessly at Dermot's wrist, his screams muted by Dermot's wide palm over his face.
Get the fuck off him, man!
Screamed a gangster behind them, cocking back his pistol's hammer, but Fitz yelled,
Hey, don't shoot! Dermit is my son, you idiot!
Dermit did not respond. Reaching the employees-only door, he kicked it open and marched down the hall, past rooms stocked with sex toys, packaged drugs, and military-grade weapons. As he reached the club's back doors, Dermit adjusted his grip on Cormac's head, and his brother gasped for air.
Smash! Just fucking listen to me, man!
Dermit bucked through the doors and walked out, into the sunlit parking lot behind the club. Dragging Cormac beside him, he marched straight toward the dumpsters and spotted 2 drops of glistening red on one of the containers.
Don't look in there, Smash! Don't look!
Reaching out with his left arm, Dermit seized the plastic lid.
Please, Dermit!
Dermit ripped the lid off its hinges. He stared down into the piled garbage. There, amongst soggy cardboard and glass bottles, lime wedges and soiled paper towels and used condoms, he saw her hand, pale and limp. A rat was chewing through her thumb. Dermit stared at the hand, at her fingernails, and the little mole on her wrist, his vision drifting in and out of focus, breathing slowly, completely numb.
Fucking hell!
voice behind him.
Ah, fuck me. What? Why'd you have to do that, Smasher? Fucking why?
Dermit blinked. Turning, he saw that 5 men now stood around him in the parking lot. All of them, except for Fitz, had their weapons drawn and aimed at his chest.
He was your fucking brother,
said Mooney. The one-armed driver was holding a revolver in his only hand. Dermit blinked again, and, cocking his head, he slowly lifted up his right hand. It was empty, but dirty. Lots of pulpy blood was dripping down his fingers and his wrist, and there were tight clumps of black hair and bits of bone and scraps of skin. Some of the skin was pale white with freckles, other bits dark brown, and a diamond stud earring was stuck in his palm. Dermit looked down by his feet. His brother's headless body lay in a puddle of red, which was spreading slowly across the pavement. Cormac's pistol, it was still in his holster. He hadn't gone for it.
Dermit,
said Fitz very softly.
my friend, listen to my voice. Can you hear me?
Dermot's face finally moved, cheeks flinching, lips trembling, a growl rising in his throat. The 4 men with the pistols crept a little closer. Dermit inhaled through his nostrils, exhaled through his clenched teeth. Bowing his head, he turned his narrowed eyes to the nearest gunman.
Hey, now, big fella.
Mooney whispered, his finger tightening on the trigger.
Let's not make any sudden movements and...
Dermit made a sudden movement. Spinning as he dove sideways, he snatched the gangster's wrist and yanked. The whole arm ripped free with a pop and spray of blood, and before Mooney's scream could even exit his gaping mouth, Dermit had ducked low, another gangster's bullet slicing the air above him, and launched forward, punching the second gunman in the chest, blasting him off his feet and through the windshield of a parked car. The final 2 attackers tried to back away as they took aim, but Dermit pounced upon them, seized both their heads in his hands, and smashed the heads together in a bloody burst of shattered skulls and gelatinous brains. Straightening up, Dermit flicked the filth off his hands, then turned back to Mooney. The man was wriggling worm-like across the pavement, shedding blood and tears and snot as he tried to get himself under a truck. Dermit took 1 step toward him, and setting his right boot against Mooney's face, he leaned in and crushed the skull flat. Walking back to the dumpster, Dermit swallowed, took a deep breath, then reached inside and gently pulled Lotus out. Her body was so very light. Rigor mortis hadn't set in yet. She was limp like a doll with cold skin and sweet-smelling hair and 4 bullet holes in her chest and 1 just above her right ear. Dermit cradled her against his chest, squeezing his cheek against the top of her head, tears falling from his eyes, even as he ground his teeth and every muscle in his body clenched.
You know the order to do that. It didn't come from Cormac,
said young Fitz, who had pulled off his cap and now held it over his heart.
He never would have done that unless the order must have come from, you know.
Dermot's eyes went hard as iron as he pictured his mother's face in his mind. An all-consuming wrath filled his being. He nodded.
So, what are you gonna do?
Dermit McMurra turned, his giant shadow stretching across the crumpled bodies on the pavement, and carrying Lotus with him, he headed out of the parking lot and into the shadowy alleys of the city, growling 1 word as he departed. March 17th, 1998. There was an energy in the foggy air that morning. The St. Patrick's Day parade would begin in a few hours, just outside the Catholic Cathedral in the borough of Little Dublin, before moving through the Irish neighborhood, then across the Odin's Gate Bridge to Grim Bay's corporate downtown. Cops and volunteers had shown up before dawn to close off streets with traffic cones and erect bleachers and a sound system along the main thoroughfare. Food trucks were already rolling in and setting up, and the smells of hot coffee and diesel were strong in the air. But beyond the usual stress and excitement of the annual event, there was an added tension to the morning preparations. You see, a great deal of the volunteers that were out and about, with their reflective vests on and paper cups of whiskeyed coffee in their hands, also had pistols or even submachine guns strapped just out of sight. And on the rooftops all along the main road, those manning the confetti cannons were armed with more than glittery shamrock confetti in vibrant shades of green, white, and orange. Through binoculars or the scopes on their sniper rifles, the gangsters watched the entrances and exits of the shops and homes and the church, looking for any sign of their new number one enemy, who had, less than 24 hours earlier, been their chief assassin. News had spread fast through the ranks of Celtic cartel. Cormac was dead. Smasher was responsible. Now, the silent giant on the prowl. Shoot to kill. That was the order, and it came from the top. Over by the harbor, two of the cartel's windowless vans were parked on a service road that hugged the waterline. The driver of the first van in front hopped out and climbed onto the waist-high concrete barrier. Unzipping, he took a piss over the ledge to the water 100 feet below. When done, he gave himself a little shake, re-zipped, and glancing up at the rusty pylons of the suspension bridge, climbed down and returned to the driver's seat. One of the guys in the back of the van yawned, and another hummed to himself as he loaded bullets into the clip of his HK MP5. The mounted radio on the dashboard gave a pop, then a hiss of static, and a woman's voice said,
Black Van, this is CC Comms. Do you read me, Black Van? Over.
The driver suppressed a yawn with the back of his hand and snatched up the handset.
Hey, it's Callum. What's up, Sadie?
No names on comms, boys. You're supposed to say Black Van, and you're supposed to say over.
Yeah, well, how about I go and visit you later and bend you over?
The driver grinned at his own joke and looked back over his shoulders at the others, but they weren't laughing. Disappointed, he turned back to the radio.
So what you want?
Any sign of the big guy, over?
Don't you think I'd tell you if there was? No, obviously. Hey, is it true what they're saying? Did Smasher really rip Mad Cow's head right off his body?
Now the men in the back took notice of the conversation, growing quiet, leaning forward. After a long moment, Sadie answered.
Just keep your eyes open, boys, and report in every 15 minutes. We've got more guys coming into the city as we speak. We'll be ready when he shows up. Over.
Yo, what about them Russians Mad Cow was meeting with?
Someone in the back shouted.
Why ain't they helping us out with this?
The driver turned in his seat.
I wasn't holding down the thingy, you stupid fuck. She can't hear you.
Well then call her back and ask her, you piece of shit.
I'm not calling the bitch back, you fucking bitch.
The man loading the magazines suddenly shushes them.
Shut up! You guys hear that? What is that?
They all went quiet.
What the fuck?
Glancing out his window at the driver's side mirror, the gangster's eyes bulged.
Oh, fuck!
Framed within the dim and misted reflection, he watched as a huge figure in the street behind them shoved himself against the other van, pushing the vehicle up so that it leaned and smashed against the concrete barrier.
Fuck!
He grabbed the handset.
He's here, he's right fucking here, and... He pushed the van over the fucking ledge! What the hell is happening?
The driver threw down the handset and twisted the key.
I am running down this fucker right now!
He jammed the van into reverse and floored it.
Say again, Black Van, over.
The reversing van lurched to a sudden stop, the tires continuing to squeal, then tilted suddenly forward. Its front bumper smashing into the asphalt. The driver grunted as he slammed against the steering wheel, and the men in the back screamed.
Do you require backup, Black Van?
The van gave another violent lurch, and a window shattered. Raising the handset with a shaking hand, the driver said,
Tell them to empty the goddamn armory! We don't just need men! We need a goddamn tank to stop this free...
Everything spun wildly as the van twisted into a roll, riding up onto the barrier. Metal groaned, sparks flew, and the remaining windows burst. Then gravity vanished, and through the glass and the blood and screams in the air around him, the driver saw the world blur into streaks of dawnlight and dark fog. The van hit the bay with a glorious splash and sank from sight, leaking bubbles. Up on the ledge above, Dermit dusted off his hands and, panting slightly, looked around. He had heard a bit of that last radio call. If the cartel comms knew where he was, they'd send a team right away, and another team would be heading to retrieve the military-grade weapons stored at the club. The fact that they hadn't already done that was interesting. Sure, those arms were meant to be sold off, or else sent over to the IRA in Ireland, but still, it meant they underestimated him, that she underestimated him. Well, could he really be surprised? Taking a deep breath, Dermit crouched, digging his boots into the debris-strewn street. Then he pounced forward into a wild sprint. There would come a time, the doctors had all said, when his ever-growing body would start to work against him, when his bones would have trouble supporting his massive weight and his muscles would grow weak. But if that were true, that time was not today. The sun began to rise, and the city glowed violet in its light, casting giant shadows across the walls and windows as Dermit flew down the winding alleyways, an explosion of speed and fury, kicking up dust and warping the air around him so that scattered newspapers fluttered in his wake. The first of the company trucks was barreling down the misty road away from the club when Dermit got there. Annoyed, he let it go and charged toward the second truck, which was idling out front, its headlights glowing through the fog. The driver walked around from the back of the truck, flicking his cigarette butt as he climbed up and opened the door. Just as he was pulling himself inside the cab, Dermit flew from the mist and drove an elbow into the truck door. The driver was crushed against the jamb as the door imploded and the window shattered. Landing with a grunt, Dermit spun and wrenched the smashed door free from the truck. The driver's body thudded to the pavement, and footsteps rushed from around the back of the truck. Dermit marched forward, holding up the door like a shield as a gangster rounded on him and opened fire. Reaching the gunman, Dermit swung his shield and batted the gangster into a bloody backflip. Marching to the front of the entrance of the lusty Shamrock, Dermit threw down the mangled door, flexed his huge fingers, then tightened them in sledgehammer fists. The front doors started to swing open from within as he reached them, and punching out with both hands, he smashed the doors the other way, knocking them off their hinges and flattening two gangsters on the other side. Ducking inside the dim front hall, he walked across the doors, the men under them groaning and their bones bent and snapped. The house lights were on as Dermit rounded into the club's main room. He headed toward the employees-only door at the back when a voice from the balcony called out,
Whoa, shit! Oh, no, you don't!
And he heard the distinctive thunk and a click of an MP5's charging handle loading around in the chamber. Dermit dove into a roll as the man opened fire. The bullets whizzed by, striking the dance stage, and Dermit snatched the leg of a stool, spun, and thrust it upward. It burst into pieces when it collided with the gunman, who grunted and slumped sideways, falling against a panel of switches at the DJ's booth. Power surged to the lighting grids and amps. The fluorescent house lights powered down as the rave lights booted up and began to strobe, to spin, to light the whole place in pulsing rainbows and drifting disco ball constellations. The speakers thumped to life, blasting out a track and shaking the floor beneath Dermit's boots. He turned back to his destination, just as someone kicked the employee door open from the other side. Dermit saw a flash of gunfire and tried to jump sideways, but felt searing hot pain in his side. He landed slumped against the side of the stage, dizzy with shock, blinded by the wild lights, and watched as a figure moved towards him.
Hunting big game,
The gangster said, cocking the shotgun in his hands.
requires a big gun, don't it?
He raised the gun. A shot went off. The Irishman dropped his weapon. Then he dropped. Dermit looked up at the stage, blinking, where a whiskey blaze now stood in the spotlight, a compact Walter PPK pistol in her right hand. She was dressed in shiny green tights for the holiday's performance, but her expression was serious as the fucking grave.
Hey,
She said, looking down at him.
you okay?
Dermit winced and felt at his left side. A handful of buckshot had peppered his abs just below the ribs. The pain was sharp, and his shirt was bloody and ruined. That was annoying, but he nodded.
Then get up.
From the front entrance, they heard car horns, shouting, and running feet. Dermit grabbed the edge of the stage and pulled himself upright, gritting his teeth.
Your brother,
said Whiskey.
I loved him too, but she was one of my girls, Derm.
Turning, she took aim at the front hall.
So fuck him. Fuck them all.
Gangsters swarmed into the club, voices raised, guns drawn. Whiskey shot the first man in the chest, but the one behind him fired back. She dashed sideways out of the spotlight. Dermit charged forward, swinging his right fist in a wide arc. The blow sent the gangster into the air, his body contorted in a broken dance in the pulsing strobe lights. Slapping the next gunman's weapon away with his left open hand, Dermit jumped up and drove his massive knee into the bastard's chin. Teeth burst out like a dental firework. Whiskey shot two more as they rushed inside. Then a man screamed as he scurried up the stage stairs and sprinted at her, ducking nimbly left and right to avoid her bullets. Dermit turned to help, but saw her clutch the pole in the center of the stage with her free hand and swing herself up and around to meet the attacker. She drove both her heels into his chest and he grunted, staggering backward, then raised his gun. But Whiskey continued to spin, now hooking her knees around the pole and aiming with both hands as she revolved. She put her round between his eyes. Nodding in appreciation, Dermit turned back to the front hall as three more rushed in. Dipping under gunfire, Dermit pounced, snatching the front man's head, crunching it in his hand, then seizing the corpse by the shirt and using it as a shield as he charged at the others. Guns roared. Dermit swung the headless body, knocking down a man, then stomped on his face, spun around, and thrust the headless body in his hands at another, who was knocked off his feet.
Behind you!
Whiskey screamed, flipping herself to her knees on the stage. Two light machine guns fired from the employees-only doorway. Dermit dove left, behind the cover of the balcony stairs, then peeking around, saw Whiskey jerk backward with a spray of blood from her left shoulder. She landed on her back, then returned fire, and rolled backward off the stage, out of firing range. One of the gunmen jumped up onto the stage and advanced on her, as the other came running at Dermit, his flickering shadow stretching around the edge of the stairs. Dermit pulled himself to his feet and ran into the shadowy back of the club, bullets whistling at his back and shattering mirrors on the wall. Reaching the pool tables, he rolled over one and pulled it sideways with him. As bullets struck the table's thick slate interior, Dermit twisted on the floor, brought his knees to his chest and kicked out hard. The pool table shot across the floor, kicking aside chairs like bowling pins and flattened the gangster.
Man, screw this!
Dermit heard the other guy yell, and firing a burst in both his and Whiskey's directions, he grumbled,
I'm getting the fucking minigun.
As he ran from the stage and through the back door, Dermit hurried to check on Whiskey.
I'm fine,
she said through clenched teeth. The bullet had carved a gash on her upper arm.
Just get that bastard! Hurry!
Dermit ran, not for the door itself, but straight for the lockup room he knew the man was headed to. Roaring as he charged, Dermit jumped and drove his shoulder into the wall, smashing through the reinforced drywall and bursting out the other side. His body split apart a shelf of drugs in the lockup room, and he found himself engulfed in a cloud of white powder. Snorting and blinking, Dermit marched forward through the cloud and saw the red-faced fool trying to heave up a heavy machine gun from the floor. The man brought his gaze up to the cocaine-covered giant looming over him.
Oh, man!
Dermit swung his fists together and pulverized the gangster's head. Returning to the main room through the hole in the wall, Dermit coughed and shook his head. His hair, thick with misted blood and powder, was all over his face.
Jesus, look at you,
said Whiskey, setting down the pistol as she moved behind the bar. She flipped a switch that finally silenced the music, then wet a rag and tossed it to him. Dermit grunted his thanks and began to clean himself off. She sighed, looking around at the bodies and destruction in her club. On the stage, the bullet-blasted pole gave a squeak and fell with a clang.
This fucking place.
Wincing as she moved her bleeding left arm, she retrieved a bottle of Jameson 12, managed to uncork it, and looked to Dermit.
Drink?
Blowing his nose on the rag, he shook his head. Whiskey shrugged, took a swig, then turned and began pouring the rest across the bottles on a glass shelf behind the bar. Then she pulled out and lit a Zippo, and backing up, tossed it onto the counter. A quick burst of fire spread, reflected in the mirrors there. Whiskey through the bottle, and the whole shelf burst into flames and glittering glass. She turned to Dermit as the fire rose up behind her.
Come here a minute. Lean down.
Cocking one eyebrow, Dermit set aside the filthy rag and knelt. Whiskey reached up and put her hands on his cheeks, then pushed her hands up, combing his tangled hair from his face. He bowed his head, and reaching to pull in the rest of his hair, she gathered it tight atop his head, twisting it into a top knot, then used an elastic band on her wrist to hold it in place.
There now. That's better.
Dermit looked up at her, gratitude coming into his mind, clashing with the anger there. He struggled with the feelings, fighting his own thoughts. His heart began drumming madly in his chest, though the drugs he had inhaled might have had something to do with it.
I'll finish up here. You go. Your mom will be at the pub, but she'll be protected. Be careful, Derm.
Dermit nodded, and rising up, his teeth chattering, he turned his back on Whiskey Blaze and the blazing whiskey behind the bar. Snatching up the fallen pole on the stage, he ducked through the hall, then out the ruined front doors. The morning mist was retreating, and sunlight was warming the world. Another car of attackers sped into view, and drifting, came around the corner toward him. Spinning the metal pole in his right hand, he leaned back and thrust it into the air. It pierced the windshield and the driver, and the car spun, hit the curb, and flipped into a violent roll. Dermit tilted his head, cracking his neck, then set a hand on his injured side. Taking a deep breath, he leaned down to charge into a run, then hesitated. Walking instead to the back of the truck, still idling outside, he grabbed the padlock on the latch, tore it off, then swung open the doors. Reaching up to the weapon crates inside, he snatched out a grenade, pulled its pin, then returned it to the crate. Now, he ran, the wind on his face, the great boom from behind him shaking the foundations of Little Dublin as a rolling cloud of black smoke rose up against the city skyline. The night before, they had wrapped Cormac's body in a tarp and taken it through the back door of the Ballygub and up the stairs to lay it in the office above the pub. Cormac was still dressed in his denim jacket, his black t-shirt, his gold chain necklace, and his designer jeans, though one of his expensive sneakers was missing, as was his diamond earring and his head. Mairead still hadn't let anyone move him again. She sat behind her desk, across the corpse on the floor, the wolfhounds huddled and whining anxiously on their dog bed in the corner. On his stool by the door, the druid was, for once, silent. Mairead nodded drowsily in her chair, drifting in and out of a restless sleep, as her half-shut and sunken eyes looked out the window at the street below and at the bay beyond. The sounds in the city were strange today. Above the chatter of excited voices and the warming up of percussion and bagpipes clustered in the side streets, the wail of fire engines could now be heard. A tap came on the office door. Ma did not react, except to lift her hand to take a puff on her cigar. But it had gone out an hour ago. Cleaning his throat nervously, the druid closed the antique Bible he was reading, hopped off his stool, and moved to open the office door. Old Fitz came in, straightening his glasses.
"Oh then, Ma,"
he said, trying not to look at the decapitated man on the floor.
"There's yet another complication."
Sighing, Mairead spun languidly in her chair.
"What the fuck now, Fitz?"
The bartender nodded toward the windows.
"Well, all them fire trucks were meant to be in the parade. They've all headed to the club, which sounds like it's all gone up in smoke. The coppers are still following our orders for now, but the mayor is asking to cancel the parade."
Mairead snarled, some of her usual spark coming back into her eyes.
"Oh, fuck that. Little Dublin has hosted St. Paddy's Day for the past 12 years. And you can tell the bloody mayor that if he sends away so much as one ice cream truck, I'll make sure he never gets another Irish vote. If that doesn't persuade him, remind the bastard that I've got a video of him snorting coke off his assistant's cock in the back rooms of the Shamrock. Bloody arrogant fool."
The druid chuckled weakly and returned to his stool. Old Fitz cleared his throat again.
"Things are getting worse out there, Ma, and they still cannot track him down, so..."
Mairead narrowed her eyes, grumbled to herself, then nodded.
We keep the parade on. Yes. Smasher is shy. He won't come near while the streets are busy. It's best this way, yes. I'm not sure 'tis,
said old Fitz.
You think I don't know my own son?
She shouted, startling the dogs in the corner. Old Fitz puffed up his cheeks, then exhaled.
I think if you did, all this wouldn't have happened.
Mairead sneered, leaning over the desk.
Don't you have drinks to serve, Fitz? Yes, ma, of course.
He nodded to her, then to the druid, then left. Mairead pulled herself shakily to her feet, and moving slowly, she circled the desk to look down upon the bloody tarp and the body atop it. The first faint odor of decay was rising from the flesh.
My boy.
Her voice was as hollow as her heart, and her eyes were dry and red.
My boy.
She had not, for one moment since giving the order that had started all this, thought about the other body. Chen Lian, whom everyone called Lotus, had been dragged out of her apartment at gunpoint, brought to her place of work, questioned, executed, and discarded. As far as Mairead McMurra was concerned, that was how the slut's story should have ended. But no. For now, Lotus was back where she belonged. Dermit had carried her body gently up to the roof terrace and laid her upon their square of grass, their little lawn, their private heaven. He had cleared her up and sprinkled flowers all around her body. The only other mourner at that private ceremony had been the three-legged kitten, which had crept curiously out from the shadows to watch. And when Dermit rose to leave, wiping his eyes and shaking all over, the cat had walked up to nudge its whiskers across his boot, then hopped onto the grass and curled up beside her body, lending Lotus a tiny bit of warmth and comfort. Dermot's mind had wanted to keep that final image of her in its focus, the woman, the blossoms of early spring, and the mangy, curious, beautiful little cat. But he had forced the memory down and let the fury rise up to fill his being. There would be time to mourn in this life or the next, but for now, he had a task to complete. A gangster on the roof of St. Halvard's Cathedral listened as the parade began in the street below him. First came the rolling of the snare drums and the low humming of the bagpipes. Then the pipers began their proud song and marched. Moving around the corner and into view, the drum major led the way in his tall feather bonnet, bright sash, and tartan kilt, setting the beat with the pump of the polished silver mace in his hands. Behind him, the pipers and the drums streamed in ordered ranks slowly down the street, as the spectators crowded on either side smiled, cheered, or raised their red solo cups of beer, which stood out against the brilliant green of the crowd's hats and scarves and jackets. At his belt, the gangster's walkie-talkie buzzed to life.
Any sign of the big guy church post? Over.
Negative,
he responded, leaning against the chest-high parapet wall and looking through his binoculars at the rooftops around him, where more men waited, many with rifles, then back down at the edge of the street, where two federal agents in black suits stood outside their car, watching the parade with their arms crossed. Clipping the walkie-talkie back on his belt, he lowered the binoculars and pulled out a cigarette and a book of matches. Above the sound of the marching band, his ears picked up a sound to his left. Leaving the cigarette in his lips unlit, the gangster jogged over to that side of the church roof and peered down into the alley there. That side street was shadowy and empty, but he did notice a broken length of gutter lying on the ground and the spot where it had broken free from the roof.
Huh, that's weird.
He lit a match as behind him, a great shape loomed up, blocking the sun, and a low voice exhaled. The gangster froze, then slowly turned and looked up into Dermit McMurra's glaring face. Then massive hands grabbed him and twisted his neck with a crunch that was drowned out by the beating of the drums. Dermit lowered the body silently onto the rooftop, then, crouching, moved along the rooftop and around the cathedral's central tower to approach the other side. Hunching behind the parapet, he squinted at the rooftop next to the church, where two more gangsters looked out from behind a billboard, one through the scope of a sniper rifle. Moving to the back of the cathedral roof, Dermit took a deep breath, then sprang forward, leapt over the parapet and the alley below, and landed on the roof of the neighboring building. He rolled, kicking up dust, and staying low and quiet, ran along the rooftop toward the billboard and the two gangsters hiding behind it. The man with the rifle had just looked around when Dermit reached them, and grabbing a head in each fist, squeezed. As their bodies slumped, he flicked the gore from his hands and set off for the next roof, and the next, and the next, moving like a ghostly giant as the bagpipes and the drums and the chatter of the crowd filled the air around him, and the sunlight sifted through gray clouds, drifting in from over the harbor. As he landed quietly atop the roof of the corner drugstore, he heard the crackle of a walkie-talkie on the belt of the gangster there. Dermit dispatched the man quickly, punching his face inside out. But from the walkie-talkie, a voice said,
"Any sign of the big guy drugstore post? Over."
Dermit stared at the device.
"Do you read me? Are you there, drugstore post? Over."
Grimacing, Dermit leaned and smashed the walkie-talkie with the toe of one boot. Crouching, he moved to the front of the roof, peering through slats in the scaffolding there. Down in the street, floats, covered in Irish flags and shamrock banners, were moving along in the slow procession, and children were scrambling to pick up candies along the curb that were thrown from workers on the floats. Peering south, Dermit saw a line of his ma's men emerge from an alley, led by Old Fitz. Shoving past spectators, the gangsters marched across the road, weaving between the floats of a local union and that of the city mayor, who stood waving to the crowd, beside a giant plastic statue of St. Patrick in his green robes and tall bishop's hat. The gangsters were heading for the drugstore, and Dermit saw their eyes looking up at the roof as they got nearer. Then the group split, some walking into the store, others moving to the alley on its side. Dermit backed away from the edge, thinking hard. There wasn't much cover on this roof. He wasn't sure he could take them all up here, so, making up his mind, he darted to the side of the building and jumped. Not all the way to the next roof, but to the wall of that building, letting himself hit and slide down the bricks as he fell into the alley. The three gangsters walking below all gasped and looked up, just as Dermit landed on the one in front, crushing him to the ground under his boots. Backhanding the second man into the wall, Dermit darted to the last man. It was Old Fitz, but the bartender had already drawn a pistol and raised it as he stumbled backward. Dermit just had time to seize a fist around the barrel when the gun went off, the blast muffled by his flesh. He grit his teeth and plain blossomed, and blood splurted from his hand. Yanking his arm sideways, Dermit pulled Old Fitz off his feet and shoved him to the ground. The pistol bounced down the alley, and Dermit raised a boot to stomp.
"Wait!"
Dermit paused, his foot in the air. Old Fitz sighed, looking up, his glasses broken and askew.
"Just don't hurt me, son. Mr. Dermit, please."
Dermit grumbled in his throat, then gently lowered his foot onto the ground and backed away. Old Fitz let out a relieved breath and collapsed onto his back, clutching at his broken hand and dislocated shoulder. Dermit looked down at his own left hand. His palm was singed and bloody. Then he looked up and out the end of the alley, at the back of the crowd and the parade moving beyond them. One young boy, holding his mother's hand, had turned his head and was looking at Dermit. Dermit lowered his left hand to hide the grisly wound, then smiled weakly and waved with his right. The boy blinked. Dermit grunted and twisted backward, misted blood suddenly filling the alley from a fresh wound in his right shoulder. Snarling, he flattened himself against the wall. Over on the road to his left, several voices cried out at the gunshot, but the parade music continued. It wasn't until the second sniper shot sounded that the crowd began to panic in earnest. Dermit had felt the second bullet wind on his face and crouched, panting, clinging to his bleeding right shoulder with his bleeding left hand. As the drums in the street lost their rhythm and quieted, and the bagpipes released their final breathy whines, he saw the chaos of confused and frightened spectators, and heard the pounding of many running boots. Turning to his right, he saw two armed gangsters come around the corner at the back end of the alley, and heard voices on the roof above as well. Gritting his teeth, Dermit straightened up and sprinted toward the main road, leaping over Old Fitz. At the sight of Dermit sprinting out of the alley, a mother screamed and pulled her children close. Dermit swerved to avoid them, tripped on a fire hydrant, and crashed against the float, which lurched. A little woman in a leprechaun outfit fell from the float with a gasp. Dermit caught her in one hand as he grabbed the float and steadied it with the other, grunting in pain. He set the little woman down on the sidewalk as people ran screaming all around them. A police siren wailed. From the rooftops above, men called out, then more gunfire sounded. Dermit leapt backward, bullets pelting the float and flattening its tires. Spinning around, he dashed around the other side of the float, coming face to face with two bagpipers, who each tossed aside their instruments as they pulled pistols from the fur pouches at their waists. Dermit dove at them, crushing their faces with his fists, then ducking as bullets flew from the roof of the drugstore. Looking down, he saw that he was standing on a manhole cover, and diving his heel into its edge, he flipped it up, caught it, and held it like a shield as he dashed to the next float. The shield rang like a gong as bullets pelted its iron surface. He ducked into the shadow of the next float, from which the oversized St. Patrick smiled down, and the mayor waved his arms frantically and screamed,
Drive, drive, drive! Goddamn Irish!
The float shot suddenly forward a few feet, then its tires squealed to a stop as people ran across the road, moving in all directions. From the fray, two gangsters rushed out. Dermit swatted the heavy manhole cover left and right, knocking the men aside, then held it up against the gunfire from another rooftop across the street. But on the sidewalk, two cops looked up and opened fire on Dermit's attackers. Then another cop, a corrupt son of a bitch whom Dermit knew from the pub, opened fire on those cops. It was madness, a storm of motion and violence and chaos. Next to him, the mayor's float started forward again, honking as it swerved down the road, crushing lost bagpipes under its tires. When it traveled for 100 feet, a box truck sped suddenly from a side street, barreling into the float, which flipped onto its side. St. Patrick took down a line of Irish flags with his hat as he toppled into the street. Dermit narrowed his eyes, watching as gangsters emerged from the back of the box truck, unloading the military weapons within. He whipped his head side to side. There were still so many civilians in the street. They wouldn't use those. Not here. They couldn't. A door burst open to his right, and another pair of gangsters charged. Dermit spun and threw the manhole cover. It popped the head off one man and bounced off the brick wall. Dermit lunged, grabbing and smashing the other's head with a hand, then catching the iron cover. Turning back to face the weapons truck, he watched as four men cringed under the weight of a positively massive gun. No, not even a gun. An M242 Bushmaster autocannon, and set it on its hefty stand. Dermit sighed and shook his head. This was getting ridiculous. As the men hurried back to the truck to get the ammo, another emerged from the back, bringing out a shoulder-mounted rocket launcher. Tires squealed behind him. What now? Dermit spun, watching as a black car careened onto the sidewalk and sped toward him, knocking aside trash cans. That was not a cartel vehicle, and as it came closer, he recognized the suited men in the front seats as the federal agents from last week. Pinned between the oncoming feds and the rocket-launching gangster, Dermit crouched and jumped. The RPG fired with a whomp and whoosh, sending the rocket straight for where he had been, and where the feds in the cars still were. Dermit pivoted with a grunt, spinning back to the sidewalk and batting the air with the manhole cover. The rocket struck his shield and ricocheted, knocking Dermit off balance as it spiraled into the air, hissing smoke like a firework. Then the car struck Dermit's legs and he was flipped over it, the windshield shattering under his weight, the air knocked from his lungs as he rolled over the roof and the trunk, and he fell heavily to the sidewalk. Down the street, the wild rocket struck the clock tower on St. Halvard's Cathedral with a mighty boom. Dermit lay for a moment, dazed and numb. Then he rolled to his side, watching as the black car barreled on and collided with the men at the M242 and screeched to a stop. Agent Tippett jumped from the driver's seat, pulling a service weapon and shooting three gangsters dead where they stood. Dermit pulled himself to his hands and knees, panting, groaning, numbness, giving way to fiery aches and sharp stinging pain all over his body. He was losing steam, losing blood too, come to think of it. But he wasn't done. Not yet. Getting drunkenly to his feet, the ginger giant jogged across the debris-strewn street, entering a side alley, stumbling forward, heading for the Ballygub pub just around the corner. Dark clouds now covered the sun, and the day was cool and gray. Dermit took in a deep breath, tasting the promise of rain on the sea breeze, and slowed as he approached the pub. Down the road on the far side, 3 police cars had just pulled into view, setting up a barrier. They would box him in, surround him, take him out if he didn't hurry. But just before the Ballygub's windows, he paused. The curtains moved inside, and glancing at the reflection in the windows of a car parked outside, Dermit spied the shape of a dozen men within the pub. They would all be armed, with their fingers on the trigger, ready to blast him as he entered the pub. Dermit wouldn't make it after all. That was clear enough. Even if he wasn't tired and bloody and dazed, not even he could withstand a chest and face full of bullets. So, this was it. Dermit reached up with a shaky, blood-splattered hand, tucking a loose bit of hair from his sweaty cheek and tucked it behind his ear. Then, exhaling, he squeezed his hands into painful fists one last time and took one step toward the pub's front door. Gunfire did fire within, and Dermit spasmed, but no bullets came from the windows to strike him. After a few seconds of continuous fire and many screams, the pub went quiet. Reaching the door, his eyebrows raised, he pushed it open and stepped inside. The setup for the holiday party was still there. Streamers on the ceilings, green-dyed beers abandoned on the tables. But the drinkers must have all run out at the first sound of trouble. And the gangsters that had stayed behind to protect their queenpin upstairs, they now lay smoking and bloody around the bar. Dermit looked over at the last man standing. Young Fitz, in his newsboy cap, stood behind the bar, panting, a smoking Tommy gun in his hands, a haunted look in his eyes. Dermit stood crouched just inside the doorway, staring at his friend. Young Fitz blinked, then lowered the gun.
"Sup?"
he said, his gaze passing over the bodies around him.
"I don't know I've never actually,
Dermit nodded and moved slowly toward him. Reaching across the bar, Dermit gently took the gun, then used his filthy sleeve to wipe it down. Fitz swallowed, shook himself, and forced a smile onto his face.
"So, how was the parade?"
Dermit grinned, then chuckled, wincing as his body shook.
"You okay?"
He shrugged.
"And my dad, is he?"
Dermit shook his head.
"Oh, good. Thanks."
Dermot's finger didn't fit in the Tommy gun's trigger guard, so he pinched and twisted off the metal bit, then squished one bloody fingerprint against the trigger before tossing the gun onto a nearby table. Fitz looked up at his friend and smiled sadly.
"I guess you and I won't. Well, you never know. Maybe we'll meet again someday. Grab a pint?"
Dermit nodded. Outside, the sounds of police sirens grew louder.
They can't know so, I guess?"
Dermit raised one huge hand into the air and squinted a tiny question.
"Am I ready? Hell no. How could I possibly ready for..."
Dermit slapped him sideways, but only with about 2% of his full strength. Fitz smashed through a stool and lay groaning. Then he raised a shaky hand to give a thumbs up. Dermit took a deep breath, and ducking through the doorway behind the bar, he walked up the old stairs. The hall was dim and quiet as Dermit passed through it, reached his mother's office, and opened the door. He saw Cormac's body on a tarp on the floor, and 2 wolfhounds in their corner, and his mother, McMurra, standing stiffly behind her desk. Dermot's blue eyes blazed in his battle-scarred face. Crouching through the doorway, he took one long stride forward.
"Druid magic!"
howled the druid, running from the left and raising his dagger. Dermit didn't even look over. He just snapped out his left arm, seized the man's head, and squeezed. Across the room, Mairead flinched, her upper lip wrinkling and pulling back, revealing her tobacco-stained teeth. Dermit took another step, his boot setting down just before the edge of the bloody tarp.
"Dogs!
Mairead screamed.
Get him!"
The wolfhounds looked up at her, then turned their narrow faces to Dermit and did not move.
"Ah, damn it!"
Dermit stepped over his brother's body, and reaching the desk, he grabbed it and thrust it on its side, spilling papers, an ashtray, and a telephone to the floor. Mairead flattened herself against the back wall, raising her chin defiantly, even as her body shook. Dermit came to stop before his mother, looming over her, his huge chest rising and falling with deep, growling breaths. She swallowed.
Well then,
She said through gritted teeth.
here we are. What do you want me to say, huh? That I'm impressed?
Narrowing her eyes, she shook her head.
No smasher. Tearing shite apart is easy. Building it up, that's hard. That's what I did. It's what your brother did. But you're just...
She grimaced, glancing sideways out of the window, where the flashing lights of police cars flickered in the gathering gloom.
You were always an impossible child, you know that?
She closed her eyes and screwed up her face.
It nearly tore me in two when you were born. And when you were a bairn, you were just always fucking crying. I would beg and plead and try to calm you down, but nothing ever worked. I shook you till my arms were sore. I didn't know what you needed. It's a terrible thing, that, for a mother.
She took in a shaky breath, then looked back up at him, grief and hatred showing in equal measure in her eyes.
But you know who did understand you? Who could get you to stop crying? Cormac.
Tears came into her eyes.
Your brother cared for you. And look what you did to him. Look what you did to my boy.
Her lips trembled.
You monster.
Dermot's fists hung, bloody at his sides, and his gaze remained locked onto her wrinkled face.
You should kill me now while you can, because otherwise...
She wiped angrily at her eyes.
You've done a lot of damage today, oh yes, but I've a lifetime of practice fixing men's messes and turning their disasters to my fortunes.
Her lips curl into a snarling grin.
Well, go on then, boy. Crush your ma's head, because that's all you're good for, isn't it?
Dermit stared at her, his body vibrating, his jaws clenched.
Do it!
Dermit flinched, then his eyes bugged. Then, he exhaled, releasing the tension in his shoulders, his arms, his hands. His face relaxed, and his eyes softened, and leaning down to his mother's snarling face, he said,
No.
Outside, thunder rumbled above the bay, and a cool spring rain began to sprinkle against the office windows. Mairead stared up at him, shock and disbelief on her face.
How did something like you ever crawl out of my cunt?
Dermit straightened up, his top knot squishing against the ceiling. From the hallway behind him, the sound of bodies creeping forward reached his ears. Then,
It's over, McMurra,
said the voice of FBI Agent Tippett.
Back away from your mother, slowly.
Dermit obeyed, pivoting his body to look back at the doorway. Tippett and Cohen both had their pistols out, aimed at his face, and the hall was full of cops.
Shoot him!
Mairead shouted. Cohen looked nervously to Tippett, whose face was set. Ignoring the woman's outburst, the special agent met Dermot's eyes.
That was a hell of a thing you did back there. Jumping between us and that rocket. A hell of a thing. So then, are you gonna come quietly now?
Dermit dipped his head down and up, and that little movement, now that it was truly finally over, it made him suddenly tired. He swooned, blinking, weak from the pain in his side, his hand, his shoulder, his muscles and bones.
And will you agree to provide evidence against the Celtic cartel?
Tippett went on.
Oh, give me a fucking break.
Interrupted Mairead.
Him? After what he just did? No judge will give him any sort of deal.
He knows that.
Dermit nodded again to the feds, and then, careful not to make any sudden moves, he shuffled slowly toward the druid's wooden lectern and the large, antique, magic trick Bible sitting on the stand. Across the room, Mairead sucked in an angry breath.
Oh, don't you dare!
She hissed, starting to step forward, then jerking to a stop as Agent Tippett turned his pistol on her. Dermit gently took hold of the heavy book, closed its cover, then turned to face the agents. Cohen blinked curiously behind his glasses, sweat gleaming on his cheeks, then he slowly lowered his gun. As Dermit reached to hand over the Bible, he flipped it in his bloody hands. Cohen stowed his pistol, accepted the book, and peeled it open, curious.
Oh, you bastard!
Snarled Mairead. On their bed, The dogs whined and backed into the corner.
Oh my God!
Whispered Agent Cohen, scanning a page at random. A page of carefully recorded transactions of criminal activity.
You fucking ugly bastard!
Mairead ran forward, but cops hurried in from the hall and seized her. She fought back, biting and spitting.
Fuck you, Smasher! They were right about you! Everyone! You're a freak show! A freak show!
Behind the police barricade, a crowd had gathered to watch, and news cameras were there to capture the strange and historic moment as the Grim Bay police and federal agents led 2 suspects through the front door of the Ballygub pub and into the pouring rain. Mairead McMurra continued to scream and fight as they dragged her, her salt and ginger hair a wild mess, her feet kicking the mud. A few people kept their eyes on the infamous Queen Pin as she was stuffed into the back of a police car, including a middle-aged Russian couple, the wife squinting curiously, the hairy husband smiling as he sucked on the end of a large pipe, a golden ring with a bear's head fixed around one thick finger. But most of everyone in the crowd had turned quickly away from Mairead, staring instead at the second prisoner, her giant son. A pair of handcuffs had been wrapped around each of Dermit's wrists, with a third pair holding them together. He kept his head bowed and his gaze around the ground as he was brought out, half a dozen guns aimed at him the whole time, as they led him toward a waiting van outside. Parents covered their children's eyes at the sight of him, so vast, so bloody, so horrible to behold. Voices gasped, cameras clicked and flashed. At the edge of the crowd, a young college student turned and jabbed his peer in the arm.
I always knew there was something off about that bouncer at the club. What a monster!
Dermit didn't look up, but he heard the word. He heard it, and he felt it, and he knew it to be true. But that's the thing about monsters. They are not a monolith. They are monsters who get a thrill out of seeing fear in their victims' eyes, and monsters who cannot stand to look at their own reflection. And they don't all come to be what they are for the same reasons or in the same way. It's all very complicated. Nature, nurture, choices. And what the people in that crowd, all those shocked and curious faces, failed to see was that in Dermot McMurra's mind, the whole world was monstrous. Such a scary place. He had always been afraid, always, until she appeared. And when she was gone, when the blessed light of existence was so violently extinguished, all of his fear turned to pain, and his pain, his training, his power, they had overtaken him. But never again. Never again. The police van tilted and groaned under his weight as Dermit climbed into the back, turning in the cramped space to hug his knees to his chest. The officers backed away, still aiming their guns at him. He stared out the back, through the pouring rain, and tilted his tired head. Looking past the guns and the cops, his eyes had just spotted a small, white flower sticking up from a crack in the pavement, its stem bent, its petals bouncing in the rain. Dermit stared at the little blossom, and he smiled sadly. Then they swung the van doors closed, shutting him in the darkness, and drove off. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed the story, be sure to follow or subscribe and share the show with a fellow horror fan. I'll see you in the next one.